Hello, everyone. This is the podcast Paranormal Family Therapy, and I am the host, Dr. Darin Wallace. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, and a certified addictions counselor. And I have been working with families since 1996, and I've been working with families dealing with paranormal phenomena in family therapy since 2002, so about 20 years. Paranormal Family Therapy is a podcast that talks about paranormal phenomena and how the psychotherapeutic community interacts with the paranormal, with family therapy in particular. And our first guest today is Shannon Kennealy. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. I've got my little iPad here in case I need to look something up while we're talking. Yeah. And by the way, this iPad here that I have, I'm probably the only person that's ever bought the same iPad twice. Now, I don't mean I bought the same kind of iPad twice. I actually bought this iPad 2 times. I bought it I bought it for our kid for Christmas about 4 years ago. And then we were at Best Buy and he said, I'm going to upgrade to the new one. I said, well, I'll buy your old one. Then I got home and I had to explain to my wife, yeah, I bought the same freaking iPad that I bought for him. I bought it again. Yeah. Anyway, I'm all ready to go.
Good.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So Shannon is a licensed clinical social worker and has a private practice working with individuals and families. She's also a medium and can interpret spiritual energy. She works as a psychotherapist and also as a guide for those seeking spiritual guidance and connection with loved ones who have crossed over. So, welcome, Shannon. It's great to be able to interview you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So, so you're a medium and a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist.
Yes.
Share with us first, how did you get started? Like, how did you know this was something that you had that you could do? How did you develop this sensitivity to the spiritual realm?
I think I was just born this way, and it took me a long time to kind of figure out this is what was going on. Yeah, I didn't know probably until I was in my 20s. I grew up terrified, very, very terrified, and could never really be in my room alone or sleep alone. And it was always about, oh, it'll be fine. There's no one in the closet, like many kids, right? A lot of kids are terrified of the dark. Naturally, my parents they're great and tried to help me overcome whatever fears, but I don't know that they really realized what was actually going on. Even though my mother's also sensitive.
Yeah.
And I decided maybe one day after work, I was young, just out of college, and we were just kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to do after work. And somebody suggested doing a psychic development class, and then we go out to the bars afterwards, right? And so I was like, sure, I'm in. And so I went, and there was all these different kinds of classes. And so one of the classes was mediumship development, and I was not a believer. They were introducing the class, and I kind of made a snarky remark about this, like, this is ridiculous, and the teacher looked at me with a great deal of like frustration and aggression. And he was like, yeah, you out of anyone in this class should really think about what you just said, because they're around you and you just ignore them. And so that was the turning point for me. I mean, I was so taken aback by that comment, and so started to explore and realize, like, oh my God, he's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, you said something where you ignored. Was that something then that you learned to do, is to ignore these things?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, no one ever said that the possibility that what I was feeling or hearing was real. And I was just a little kid who was scared of the dark or scared of being alone. And so then you believe those messages and you start thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to put this aside. I'm just going to ignore it. And then you can turn off the tuners, right?
Mhm.
And so I did for most of my childhood. Yeah.
Now, I've worked with several people that are mediums or are children that are mediums, or at least they're developing some of this.
Sure.
And this often comes up, which is, how to be able to shut some of these things off. So how did you learn how to shut down some of these, abilities that you have, so that, you could go to sleep, or, you weren't so scared in the dark?
Well, that was hard. It was very, very hard. For me, it was just, I'm going to ignore how I feel, or I'm going to just not sleep in my room. And so
Uh,
I had an amazing brother who I would go and say, "Can I sleep next to you?" And he's amazing. And so he would always say, "Sure." But no, I, I had a hard time shutting it down. I really
mhm.
had a hard time.
And in your work now, I know you do work with some sensitives as well, or people that might be a little bit like you.
Yeah.
How do you work with those folks? To be able to shut down some of those things.
Yeah. And that's exact. So I think what I try to do is try to get the person to understand what is their stuff, right? What are their emotions?
Hmm.
What is their subconscious? And what is external to them? And I think that could be said for everyone, not just people who are sensitive, right? Is that we all have the ability to have a sixth sense. You ever walk into a room when two people have been fighting? You can feel it,
Yes. Yeah, I know
right?
that. Yeah.
Right. And so we all have, to some extent, we can feel energy. And so I just really try to help them understand those two distinctions. And
Hmm.
how do I learn over time to feel what's my stuff and other people's stuff? So that's kind of
Hmm.
how I work with people.
It is interesting in the sort of haunted house cases that I do.
Yeah.
And by the way, when you live in Denver, Colorado, you can't make your living by just working with the paranormal and family therapy, right? You just
Right.
can't do it. But I do get them every once in a while. For a variety of reasons, people make the referral. They find me. But one of the things that, yeah, that does happen is, when I work with a couple, regular couple, they've just had a fight in the lobby before they came in, and they come in, and there's just, you just sense this, oh my gosh, what did you bring in with you? And
Right.
it is the exact same thing as when, someone, has some kind of haunted house case,
Sure.
uh, where they come in and you're like, holy cow, okay, you guys just had a fight. And they're like, well, no, we didn't.
Yeah.
And it's this thing, whatever's attached to either them or a particular person in the family. You're
Right.
like, oh my gosh, like something is wrong. You just feel that sense. It's kind of unusual, but it's like it
Right.
hits you like a ton of bricks. And then as soon as they, walk out of the office, then it goes with them. And you're like, oh,
Yes.
holy
Yes.
cow. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what's interesting is that for a sensitive person who's a sensitive, who can feel that, times 10, and they don't know that they're a sensitive, they tend to interpret that as, oh, this is my problem. I
Mhm.
have anxiety. What's wrong with me? Right. And so learning how to differentiate those two things can be game changing for somebody, or learning that, oh my God, I actually have these feelers. I didn't really realize it. I have this ability that can
Mhm.
be game changing for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So you have
Mhm.
the work that you do, and that includes therapy, it includes
Yes.
mediumship and doing that. So how do
Yeah.
you balance those two things? Like, how does mediumship interfere with, maybe the couples and family therapy work that you do? How does
Yeah.
your family therapy interfere with your mediumship? I mean, how does that work?
I know it's a work in progress, Darren.
Yeah.
um, um, because they do sometimes interfere. Like every once in a while, I'll get a client who knows that I do both, and that's why they're there, and they want to do some emotional work. They also want to tap into the spiritual side, and those clients are great, right? Because I can toggle back and forth with those clients. But a lot of people come in and they're seeking one or the other. And that's the hard part. I had a client who came to me as a referral from a psychiatrist that I work with, and it was strictly to work on marriage work, right? And but one of the reasons why the marriage broke down was because of a death, right? And so that was very hard for me because they did not know I was a medium. They didn't come to me with those questions and seeking answers in that way, and I had a really hard time not saying, here's what I see. This is what
Mhm.
I'm feeling. And I know in my heart of hearts that that would have been so incredibly powerful and healing for them. But at the time, this was at the beginning of my practice, like I didn't quite know how to bridge that gap from sort of this professional viewpoint of who I was to this spiritual, like it's not talked about very much that in this community. How do
Mhm.
I do that? How do I tell them what I'm seeing and still look professional?
Mhm.
That was incredibly difficult for me. And I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. How do I bridge this gap?
Well, yeah, look, I have this sort of rating scale that I have for people that are sensitive. Like like
Mhm.
someone like you would be like a 10 out of 10, and someone who has no sensitivity at all, no matter what's happening around them, they'd be like a 1 or a 0. And I might be somewhere in the middle there amongst therapists, because I think that a lot of therapists probably have a little extra sensitivity to things just because that's what would draw them to the profession.
Totally. I agree.
I do notice, when I, you know, teach a class or something like that, 20, you know, marriage and family therapy students in a class, maybe one or two of them actually will say, yeah, I actually have a little bit of sensitivity to these things, which makes sense. Somebody would be drawn to doing therapy if they have those kinds of abilities.
That's a
And
feeling profession.
it is a feeling profession, and it actually helps people to be able to be sensitive to that. And so,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
amongst therapists, I'm probably average when it comes to, those kinds of things. And some
Sure.
people are really sensitive, right? And so, but even regular dudes like me can sense some things that do happen. Like
Yeah.
this actually happened. This hasn't happened for a few months. It actually happened yesterday, where I had a new family. It's a mother and daughter that came in, and there's all kinds of death in their family. And then all of a sudden, when they were talking about one particular death, it was
Mhm.
like a ton of bricks, just something entered into the room. and
Wow.
and and so it was one of those things where it wasn't, I mean, they were grieving, they were talking about all of this death. It really wasn't something that I needed to call attention to. It wasn't part of what we were doing right then.
Yeah.
And so it'll be something that, maybe in a month or two, I'll say, yeah, I remember the first day we met. Something actually came into the room once you mentioned this particular death.
Yeah.
But it's just, stuff like that where it's like, well, is this really the appropriate time to say
Exactly.
that something like this
E
happened, right?
exactly. Exactly. How do you know when the right time is to bring something like that up?
Yeah. And some
Sure.
kind of balance. So I can imagine that, somebody like you who's very sensitive to these things, and you and I have had conversations about this where sometimes just spirits just show up, right?
Yes, they do. They do.
Yeah. And
Sometimes they'll
so,
literally walk in the room with the client, and
uh,
s and sometimes just like you just described, as soon as you bring them up, they'll come in. So it's interesting. But yeah.
yeah. Okay. So also, I'm still curious about that. What do you do? I mean, I know you're saying you're working at it, but what do you do? With that when they've got something attached to them, or something's going on. How do you address that, or do you ignore it? Do you
Yeah.
bring it back up later? What's that look like?
If it's a client who comes to me strictly for psychotherapy, it's not as clear, and we might use sort of the empty chair theory, where we're like, I'll use the person that comes into the room. Let's say he or she is brought up, And I'll say, what do you think they might be feeling at this point in time? And
Mhm.
I will guide that conversation in a way that's healing. If I feel in time that they're open to this, I will bring it up. And that's hard though. I mean, let's just acknowledge, like, if you bring this up later on in the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, it's less credible because you already know the family, you already know the individual, and you probably heard about the spirit in the room several times. So that clouds both your judgment and their judgment, right? And so one of the things I'm working on is, how do I do this right up front, before I get to know the family? Right now, Darin, honestly, my practice is a little segmented, right, between the people who come to me who really want that and people who come to me strictly for psychotherapy because of that very reason.
And it makes
Yeah,
sense that that's being able to have that divide. And you and I've talked about the idea of boundaries, and
sure.
what are my boundaries when it comes to being a therapist, and then what are your boundaries with being a medium, and when
Right,
they intersect, then what do you do with it? There's that collision between those two things, and what do you do with that? Right,
right.
which is part of what family therapy is, right? When you work with a
Absolutely.
couple, when you work with a family, they have different things that are each person brings to the relationship, that are important to them, and then when they collide with each other, is
Right,
often where the work is, on how to be
right.
able to manage that and deal with that. So I think that's it's sounds like it's a struggle that we help people in family therapy manage and deal with, and then in this case, it's what you're doing with yourself in the room
That's
while they're
right.
telling you about all of these things that are going on for them.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Well, can you share with us, some of your paranormal experiences, like some of the things that have stood out, in your life, doing this kind of work, and what it's been like for you, what it's been like working with others with this, and just give us a feel or a sense of, what's your experience.
You know what I am finding, in terms of working with others that are sensitive, like, I am finding that our teenage community is quite sensitive.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's just sort of the age group, the emotional stage that they're in their life. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm finding more teens nowadays just being super tuned into energy. And so that's been interesting, as to how to help teenagers understand the difference between their own anxiety, which is real at that age because we're going through so many changes and identity work and all this, and the anxiety that they're feeling due to the other stuff that they're feeling in the room or in their life or with their friends and whatnot. And so that for me has been really very interesting. So that's been a lot of work recently. But in terms of working with sort of the spirits that come into the room, I've had a couple interesting cases. Some spirits come into the room and they're very like super excited to be there and want to be part of the therapy session. And I've had a couple like that where it's been a very interesting dynamic between the living people in the room and the spirit people in the room. And some spirits come in and they just want to get a message across and they're out.
So
You
once
know,
they send the message, then that's it. They're
yeah,
okay. Did what I
yeah,
needed to do. The message was sent, and I can leave. Okay.
yeah, yeah. But I had a case where this particular young lady came to me knowing I was a medium, but also wanted to do grief work. Right.
Hmm.
And so it was a pleasure to be able to intersect these two things together, is to, the emotional work, psychotherapy work that comes with, the stages of grief and whatnot, but also being able to bring in the loved one. And so the spirit was incredibly dynamic. And he, for months, would come in and out of the room and be involved. And it was just an incredibly interesting experience. And what's neat about that case is that she came into the room thinking he passed. It was very tragic, thinking he passed one way, and it turned out he passed another way, which was, they found out about it. Like I had said, no, that's not how he passed. This is how he
Mhm.
passed. And they ended up finding out about it later, that what he said was correct.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. That was an incredibly interesting situation. Just super. Some spirits are really, really good at communicating, and I just somehow good at listening or hearing them. And some I just don't feel connected to, or it's very hard for me to get the message. And it's not always the same.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not always linear. It's not like they're communicating directly and with some clear message. It's more like a sensation that you've had. At least that's how you've sort of
Right.
described it to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I get information several different ways. And sometimes it's clear, crystal clear, and sometimes it's not.
You did say once that every once in a great while, and it's not normal. You might actually even get a name, or something like that.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah, I would say every so often they give me names. It's interesting. Some talk about how they died, some don't. They don't
Mhm.
want to know. It's not important to them. It's interesting. They all have different purpose, and are very, usually pretty clear about what the purpose is.
Yeah, it's been kind of a big deal to me to be able to, because I do the family therapy piece of this, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
and you and I have actually, I mean, we did this where, we worked on the same family together. We were at a session once where, we met. And I remember what you said. You said, "Look, I'll be in this session, but I can't guarantee that anything's going to happen. I'm not that I'm going to be able to sense something or that something
Totally.
came now." At least
Yeah.
in this one that I'm talking about, yeah, that they definitely showed up. And
Yeah.
one of the things that's a big deal to me is the psychotherapeutic world or that community
Yep.
being able to collaborate with the paranormal community, right?
I
So
totally agree.
communicate and talk with and collaborate with psychic mediums and paranormal investigators and
Yes.
clergy and Native
Absolutely.
American shamans and different folks to be able to sort of coordinate what everyone's doing with what everybody else is doing, which is what family therapy is to get multiple
Absolutely.
systems to collaborate with each other. So now, I mean, maybe we can, talk briefly. You remember that?
I do, very clear. Yes.
Yeah, very well. Do
Absolutely.
you want to talk about that one real quick? I know I have my own end of that, but where we met with a family
Yes, absolutely. It was
and
really
we weren't
fascinating.
sure anything was going to show up, but
I
it
was not sure. And you're right. You're totally right. Like, you don't know. I can't control it. It either
uh,
shows up or it doesn't show up. Right. And so I was pretty nervous about that. But no, they showed up. And actually, I think there were two different spirits that showed up. One was a family member,
mhm,
and one was connected to her trauma. Like, it was a random person, random, I should say, spirit that was that she ended up picking up in college. And so that both of those particular spirits came in pretty clearly. And I believe that session was very healing for her.
yes.
Um, and and we ended up going on to do quite a bit of both spiritual work and emotional work for several years afterwards. And she is amazing. She was amazing. She's doing so well. An amazing, at the time, I think she was a teenager.
Mhm,
Now she's an adult. But it was incredibly healing, and she just blossomed, I think, after that. Not to
mhm.
say that that one session was game changing for her, but it was the continued work that she committed to that after sort of that session that we had. I think that
Yeah.
was the spark to her willingness to create change and move through the trauma. Like, that was the spark, that session.
And I really liked that one. That I mean, it wasn't terribly different as far as the context and what the family was bringing, where you
Yeah.
had multiple family members, not always at the same time, but seeing the same thing. There was actually a physical manifestation
There
that was
was.
happening. Yeah, there was a black mist that would appear, and so one family member would see it, and then others would then see it,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
and this is typical where the dad actually didn't see it, and so he thought
Right.
it was a bunch of bullshit,
Yeah.
and then um, which then caused problems because then it became a somewhat taboo topic for the family to be able to talk about. And so, and
Yes.
then there was secrets, and then there was, in structural family therapy terms, there was sort of it's called a cross generational coalition, where you have people from one generation aligning with those in a different generation against like another parent. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what was happening because the other parent was not seeing these things. And so it was nice, when finally, two family members at the same time saw the same thing, right? And it wasn't just these individual things. And I
Right.
think if I remember right with that one, the dad eventually did see it as well, and then he was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I guess we got something here."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I always like that story, because it's a testament, when you get different kinds of professionals working with one another, on the same case to help family, and how it can work out if you can get, different folks
Absolutely.
to collaborate with each other, and that
Right.
was a good positive ending to, the therapy that that family was needing in particular.
Uh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm somebody where I'd love to see more of that, right? The psychotherapeutic community being open to, working with these, and some of them I know. I mean, this happens for me. I had a period in my career where I worked with, almost all of my clients were psychotic. They
Yeah.
had schizophrenia or psychotic features with bipolar or something like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was very good for my career. Also, working with the paranormal because sometimes these things are just happening for the person in their mind. Other times
Right.
it's actually happening, and then sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's
Right.
both a paranormal phenomenon and the person has psychotic features, and that
Right.
those can be tricky. And so I think it's good to be able to work with other family members to see, or to understand what they are seeing,
Yeah.
and can be really
Absolutely.
helpful, and then be able to work with, paranormal investigators and other folks that can do an investigation,
Yeah.
clergy or whoever, whatever the spiritual or religious background of, folks might be, to be able to collaborate with them.
I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with that. I think in our community, we don't do enough of that, and reaching out to other communities to help the individual or the family. So
Mhm.
I especially the spiritual community. For some reason, it's been taboo, and I think it's a real big part of people's lives that we just don't talk about enough.
Mhm.
And so I love the work you're doing. I think it's great.
Yeah, and it took me a long time. I mean, I didn't talk about this with anybody,
Yeah.
except for my supervisors. And then,
Yeah.
my supervisors then, heard, "Oh, wait, what? You're working with people whose houses are haunted?"
Yeah.
And then it kind of grew around, some of my close therapist friends. I would say, "Yeah, I actually do this thing where I'm getting these referrals in town, from people whose houses are haunted." And,
Right.
"Oh, really, that that's an actual thing?" Yeah, yeah, I guess so. But it took me years to actually announce it, freely and openly to other people. And so,
Sure.
you and I had that experience, right? I
Yes.
made that announcement in the class where you were in the class, and then,
Yeah.
that's what you did. So like, well, I might be
Yes.
a sensitive too, just so you know. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, same experience. Like I didn't talk about this at all with anyone. No one knew I was a medium, and except for family members, right? And probably a few close friends, but yeah, it's just not something that we freely talk about, in American traditional American society. So we don't talk about our spiritual experiences or belief systems at a dinner party,
Yeah.
right? And so we just learn to keep that to ourselves. I think I'm weird. It's different, you know?
Yeah. And I do think there are certain uh, traditions and cultures that are more open to this,
Totally.
where this would actually be celebrated and honored as part of that tradition or part of that culture.
Right.
But in Western culture, someone says they're a medium or some kind of haunted house thing, people might look at you like, "What are you talking about? What are you, weirdo?"
Mhm.
Or something like
Mhm.
that. And then other people are pretty open to it. I found that just regular old people, when they do find out about the paranormal stuff that I do,
Yeah.
they'll just tell me these ghost stories that they have from their past, like 40
Oh,
years
wow.
ago when they were a kid. Yeah, I was at my grandma's house and that was haunted and I saw this weird thing or
Yes.
heard a voice or did all of these different things when they were younger. So most people have some kind of
I hear that.
story. Not
Yeah.
everyone, but at least something that they really can't explain.
Sure.
And so Ryan Buell, who's a paranormal investigator of renown, I mean, he's done some research on this, and the percentage of Americans, like 75% of Americans, believe in the paranormal or have had some kind of paranormal experience.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot out there,
Mhm.
but it's
I agree.
also not talked about. And I think that the more that it is talked about, then probably the better and more open people will be to, not necessarily just these experiences, but being able to talk about those experiences with a loved one, who might be
Absolutely.
going through this. And now a lot of my work with this has been that how to help people talk about this with each other, loved ones, so
Sure.
that they can be supportive of one another, especially if somebody's holding some kind of secret, that's
Right.
scaring them or they're not allowed to do that in their family. It might be some
Right.
kind of punishment. So being able to open that up amongst the family members is a good
Mhm.
chunk of the work that I've done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Looking outside of the subconscious for reasons why you might be feeling the way you're feeling,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
and accepting those reasons if they're not traditional, right? It's
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about the idea of boundaries, and this applies here with this what we're talking about around
Mhm.
boundaries and what's allowed to be talked about in families. Is there some occurrence that is happening with a family member, some kind of spiritual thing that's happening with a family member,
Yeah.
that then others are saying, no, you're not allowed to talk about this. This is bullshit. This is hogwash.
Right.
You're not allowed to talk about it. Then it becomes a secret. Then there's resentment that develops.
Right.
And then they can talk about it with another family member, but they have to do it in secret. So
Right.
there's all of these boundaries that get put up, and some of our work, at least as family therapists, is
Yeah.
negotiating those boundaries around what can be
Right.
talked about and sort of opening some of them up,
Right.
so people can talk about it.
Right.
Now, you've talked about, at least with me, around boundaries around other aspects, having boundaries, like I've shared with you, yeah, sometimes these freaking spirits, work with them in family therapy, and then they'll actually follow me home.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Having boundaries around that.
I've
Yeah,
had that happen too. So
yeah,
yes. Yes.
yeah, and then they
Um,
show up, yeah, in your living room.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, they do that. Yeah. So yes, boundaries are very important.
yeah, and what to do with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Well, look, maybe we'll have you back on sometime soon. There's more things that I want to ask you about, maybe in a future session. But I really appreciate you, Shannon, coming on and talking
Absolutely.
about this, and hopefully it was positive experience for you to share this, because I know some of this is you coming out as well,
Yes.
and sharing this with others around you that
Yeah.
maybe
No.
didn't know that you actually do this kind of work and have these kind of abilities. So I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful experience talking about it. So I appreciate it.
Thank you all for tuning in to Paranormal Family Therapy, and we will see you next time.